Well, Morena koutou, everyone. I was just saying to John and Rookie, it feels a little bit like a party in here this morning. Welcome. Welcome to everyone who's joined us. It's lovely to see the Ahuriri Estuary Protection Society, Rookie and John, Biodiversity, Hawke's Bay, Aotaio, so many people in the room. So it just, I think, goes to show how important this kaupapa is. So I'll ask Joe if you would like to open us with a karakia.
Kia tautara I Māori, tēnei whare kia tautara I Māori ki tātou. He te māngai ngani hira pone te tōku tōre tapu ki a tatu mani kau te whakamome tō hui a mātou. Hei tātere ngi kupu katoa I whakapū ki nā mātou o te kau. Ko kau tēnā o te tīmatanga me te whakaotinga mai a mātou o te manaka a tūne e roto kau te kaori e tō. Ko te māngai e tautoko mai, ai. Mātou o tama o wairu o tapu, ngani hira pone te māngai. Kia kina mātou I tēnei rā humai a peke te ore he peke te kaha. He peke te māramatanga me te rangi Māori e ki mātou I tīma na mātou waiwa. Mātou mānga he tautoko mai. Ai nei ake nei. Ai.
Aye. Beautiful. Thank you, Joe. Right, so what our plan of attack today as team is we're going to start with a workshop, and Connie, thank you very much for popping that up on the board. So we're going to walk through a bit of a stormwater update. Hopefully all of the committee have had an opportunity to read all the pre-circulated information from our TAG group, and I understand we have a number of our TAG members in the room to support as well. And then we're going through our design workshop with BOFers and just acknowledging we have Rebecca and I think Amelia online with us as well. And Johan has just joined us as well online. And then we will walk into, we'll probably have a cup of tea, I think, at that stage. And then we will walk into a formal meeting where we're looking to give that design endorsement so that we can move on to the development of our master plan in more detail. So, Connie, are you happy if I pass on to you?
Yeah, kia ora, good morning. Thank you everyone for coming. It's great to see the interest in the project following some of our key stakeholder workshops. Today we're going to split the workshop into two. We'll do a stormwater update, and that's to provide the Joint Committee some context around how the stormwater has progressed in this project. And following that, we've got our design workshop, and it's a really exciting piece. And we've got a very interactive board, and I've got Gabe here from Bothamist to take the lead on that workshop, design workshop process. The other part that we're going to do as well is probably bring that project manager's update into the workshop too, just to provide some scene setting. I know it is a paper, but being like an open workshop and an open meeting, it helps to provide that context up front. Please feel free to jump in at any time. We'd love it if this workshop was iterative. We would love your conversation, your direction, your thoughts, your questions. Don't feel like you're interrupting. We're here to get the best outcomes on the project. So perhaps before I jump into the stormwater update, I'll just do a real brief overview with our project manager, Cam, to set the scene.
Hi, everyone. Step forward a little bit more. So yeah, I just thought I'd just set the scene by running over some of the work streams that have taken place over, it's probably been the last couple of months now. So I'll just give a quick overview of the project manager's report, which has been circulated, which is obviously going to be presented at the meeting. But I'll run over that now, have any questions, and then we'll move on. So you recall Lizzie Civil from PDP has been engaged to provide expert advice on the avifauna matter. So Lizzie's been involved behind the scenes advising Bothamist and also the tank group. A couple of months ago now, TNT issued its basis of design report for the Lagoon Farm project. That was the precursor to some of the design work which has then followed over the last couple of months. A draft stream classification assessment has been undertaken that looked to classify the water bodies under the National Environmental Standard for Freshwater. That information has been passed off to Bothamist to take account of. Essentially, there were no water bodies there that sort of, I guess, posed a significant risk in terms of being diverted or shifted to facilitate the design of the wetland treatment facilities. The Lagoon Farm team has been working closely with the regional park team. Some of the early advice coming through, which has been socialised with Tank, was that attenuation on the site would provide little benefit to broader catchment flooding. The reasons for that is essentially opening up attenuation at the bottom of the catchment with the hydraulic gradient, obstacles within the network, basically means that it's difficult to open up attenuation at the bottom, which would actually reduce flooding in a meaningful way up the top. So essentially, there are other tools that can be implemented to better achieve that. So as a result, this project has taken more of a focus towards treatment and looking at refining the way that the existing network deals with backup flooding behind the Pitamu pump station and using the site to refine that solution. There is a TAG workshop held on the 13th of November. So the key points discussed there were the options that Bofamuskel have developed and will be presenting to you today. We talked about the feasibility of the attenuation matter. We also talked about inclusion of the taipō, which was not in the scope of the Lagoon Farm project, which has been discussed in this forum a number of times now. We also talked about the treatment, the catchments that the wetland treatment facilities would look to consider. And we also introduced the MCA elements to tag for initial feedback. As a Bofamuskel then started to take those options and develop the MCA. We had a good workshop on that and talked through all of those matters. That basically brought the MCA to, I guess, quite an advanced draft level. The MCA was then issued to TAG for comment. No written feedback was provided, but we had some verbal feedback, so that's been taken into account. And again, the MCA will be presented to you today for discussion. Following that, on the 19th of November, we had a key stakeholders workshop that was facilitated by William from Bofamuskel. It was attended by Deputy Mayor Brosnan, Councillor Brown, Councillor Price, HBRC Chairperson Ormsby, and Councillor Curtin from the Regional Council. And myself, Connie, Phil Kelson were also there. Next up after that was a meeting with the airport. That was attended by Deputy Mayor Brosnan and myself and Connie, with Lizzie Civil from PDP also online. So we met with Gavin and Damien there to talk about the primarily the bird strike matter. So really good discussion. And the next actions that sort of came from that, we're looking at actually preparing a draft wildlife monitoring and maintenance plan to essentially confirm the feasibility of the management measures as our way of sort of working through that matter and ensuring that we're managing that risk the best we can. As a project team, we took the opportunity to review the risk register, which is important to do every couple of months. And that basically summarises the key points of our work stream over the last couple of months.
Thank you very much, Cam. Are you happy to sort of take questions at this stage, or have you got some more presentation before we hop into content of Stormwater Update?
No, we were going to basically move into the Stormwater Update. So if you get any initial questions, absolutely fine.
Is there a presentation as part of this?
No, so this session's
off
really
the back of the pre-circulated.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, team. So, Cam, if I was just to place mark us where we're at now, we've had Tonkin and Taylor do some of that technical work on the site specific, and some of the, I think probably the two key points that have maybe come out of that for us is that one, attenuation is better managed passively through, as we see later in some of the designs, through the middle of the park rather than a constructed space to store overflow at the bottom end of the park. So that's sort of what's framing up out of that piece of work. Is that a key?
Yeah, I think it's, and we have the members from the Three Waters team here who can probably respond more elegantly than I can. But my understanding is that at the beginning of this project, the anticipated outcomes were that we would have a stormwater attenuation solution as well as a stormwater treatment solution. Now, part of the basis of design and initial work that TNT were doing was essentially investigating constraints and testing feasibility of those anticipated outcomes. Now, what's come to fruition, and this is the reason why modelling was undertaken and that investigation undertaken, was that the gradient and just the natural obstacles within the network, if you open up attenuation at the bottom, that solution itself will do very little to actually reduce flooding in the places such as Piramai and so on, just because of the time that it actually takes. So what the outcome was that in fact there may be better options, in other words, better investment options to achieve more for those areas to address that particular issue, such as potentially upgrading the Piramai pump station to actually just pump more, or alternatively, like Napier City Council is doing with its other projects, at looking at redirecting stormwater from different areas so it's not being dragged the whole way through the city. So as a result, attenuation, the focus moved away from attenuation to focus more on the treatment side. But in saying that, it was recognised that the way that the site currently works with the network in terms of managing peak flows is that stormwater comes in, it backs up behind the Piramai pump station as you would expect with high flows and also high tides. And then it backs up along that sort of wetland feature along Prebinson Drive. That's designed to actually almost tip over into the site and then find its way down into that western area where attenuation was originally identified, and then gets pumped out through the Lagoon Farm pump station. So essentially that will still occur. And what this project will look to do is to better facilitate that existing solution. So it's still having a role to play in managing flood flows. It's just not opening up a huge basin, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. I think what might be useful is if we ask our technical team to join us at the table, because I think some of the questions that are going to come will naturally end up there anyway. So I think we've got a few free mics over here and here. If maybe Russell, your team in that space would like to join us at the table. So welcome, Sarah and Phil. Thank you very much. My first question after listening to that, I suppose, is a network question, and it is if the park delivers more on that existing attenuation facilitation rather than providing new, is that something that's anticipated in your network modelling, or does that pose an issue that the park won't deliver the same kind of attenuation as perhaps initially concepted?
Through the chair. I'm just trying to understand the question, but
I guess if I was to reframe the question, is that a revelation for you, or
yes, it is. It is
Okay.
new information that there is potentially more of a constraint in that ability to store. That would be basically due to what the geotech has discovered with groundwater levels. So essentially, we can take less soil out than potentially we thought.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that I suppose one of the recommendations that's coming from the work that the Joint Committee's doing back into your directorate is that you need to consider attenuation in other parts of the network because this won't provide as much as initially would have been good to? It'll align with what was was already known, that attenuation in upstream parts of the network was also necessary. But yes, it will add to that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I think that last answer is where I wanted to get to. So we know that upstream attenuation is also required, and we've known that already.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll just open that up if there's any other questions on that first part of our stormwater update around the attenuation. Yeah.
Kia ora, thank you,
Chair
Chair.
Ormsby.
Thanks, team. This is around the stormwater attenuation as well. So reading the papers and just your update, Cam, it sounds like the attenuation and the stormwater treatment will only apply to the Pūremu catchment, and the revelation is that Taipo and the cross-country catchments can't be treated for the reasons that you've commented on within the park area. Is that an accurate summary?
So we're considering both of those waterways that run either side of the expressway and discharge into the estuary. So that's the Pūremu, and then also what we refer to as the OTRB, which is those other three waterways. So together they take about 70% of Napier's stormwater. The Taipo has been excluded from the scope, and so has the cross country that discharges out via the ocean.
So now what sort of percentage of stormwater can be treated at the park? Do we have a percentage? Because we started with 70, now we're limited to...
We're still looking at what it would take for us to get all 70% of that catchment into the park. Some of those catchments are easier sort of physically to get in there than others. The Pūremu is obviously really easy, it's right next to it. So still investigating at a high level what it would take engineering wise to get that water in there.
Okay, but the footprint of the treatment wetland can take down the line the other catchments.
It can. The more water you have in there, the shorter the residence time, and so potentially the lower level of treatment. But that is, just
And I guess
a
there's
result of
big investment questions to get those other catchments in.
Yeah, correct. And that wetland area is the maximum that we can fit on that site based on, as Phil mentioned, the groundwater and the topography of the site. So we've maxed that area out to be able to take and treat as much as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Ormsby. That has led, I think, very nicely into the next line of questions around the water quality treatment. I see Councillor Price, you've got a question?
Just trying to get my head around what you've said.
Yep.
So how much water will go through the treatment out of the whole lot? Out of the Pūremu plus the Taipo and cross country? If you you're talking of diverting the Taipo.
No. So the Taipo is excluded from
So that
from
will
the
just go
scope.
naturally into the...
Correct, yeah.
And cross country the same?
The cross country goes out via the ocean.
Okay.
Yeah, so no. So that's also excluded. So it's
It doesn't go through it.
no. So it's just the Pūremu, which is on the western side of the expressway, and then the what we call the Old Tutakuri Riverbed on the eastern side. Those two are the waterways that we're looking at diverting.
So what I'm getting at, what percentage of water would go through the treatment plant?
At the moment, we're looking at what it would take to take all of that water. But I guess there is, as I said, there's some big works to get some of that water through into Lagoon Farm. And so it's...
So what, all of that water is what percentage of all of that water?
70% of the city's
70%
stormwater.
of that,
Yeah,
of the whole lot. Yeah, that's just...
yeah, yeah.
So initially we
that's good.
thought we would have storage as well, didn't we? For water, which is
Correct.
Which is not there now.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, that was part of the vision. Could we provide attenuation on site? So all the site works have been done, and find that if we did provide storage facility on site, it would not have a upstream effect in those catchments that require storage in a high flow or a high rain event. That's where we've got to now. So passive attenuation is where we've got to, which is the current provision on the park. So not a constructed provision of attenuation.
Yeah, I know earlier on we were hoping we would have storage for heaps of water.
Yeah.
And we have lost that. which is a little bit disappointing.
We could provide it, but it wouldn't have an effect. So it's whether or not we still want to provide it as a question, which would seem
With no effect.
with no effect. Member Eden.
Yeah, just a quick question, just in regards to the tidal stream. And did you model in with the increase in subdivisions and changes in the area and the flows?
So we haven't done any modelling in the Taipō catchment, but we have for that 70% of the city stormwater, those catchments we have modelled the likes of parklands and those considerations.
Because of the noisy heat pump, we can't hear a word anyone is saying over here.
If we could just all keep our microphones close and speak up. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, because I just suppose there would be an increased usage in that area and with the stormwater being discharged in that tidal stream. So important factor, I suppose, in the equation moving forward.
I think what we might note is just that the Taipō is not within the bounds of this project, so it isn't within the scope of what we've asked these guys to look at. But what I can ask is, I know there is some work on that catchment that's being done by other project teams. Could we potentially get that circulated to the committee, a summary of capacity work in the Taipō?
Yeah, I'm aware of some work HBRC has done with the scheme reviews, and that has identified a bunch of projects, but that would be for HBRC to
do. If I can just ask our project manager to make a note of it on our action list, if we can seek from HBRC an update on that. Okay, so while we're on, what I think would be really helpful is to get to a point of understanding exactly what our vision was going into this. We've now done a detailed piece of technical work, and we're coming back with essentially the reality checks, right? We went into this with everything we would love to achieve on the park. We're now getting further down the detailed assessment of what is feasible. And so I've heard the attenuation conversation, and I think the other sort of big flag in here is the water quality conversation. So we went into this obviously with our vision of we've got 70% of our city's stormwater currently going untreated into Te Whanga. In that context, where is our technical investigation landed? So that was across the Piramu and the OTRB, getting both of those catchments, which is 70% of our city's stormwater, through the park treated so that we are no longer discharging untreated stormwater into the estuary. In that context, can someone put really succinctly where we got to?
So as we've talked about, the Piramu is really easy to get into Lagoon Farm, and that's approximately half of that 70%. And Tonkin and Taylor are looking at high level what it would take to get that other side of the expressway, other side of the water on the other side of the expressway through into Lagoon Farm. It gets more difficult the further away you get from Lagoon Farm. There's some constraints around tidal influences downstream of the pump stations that we've got on that network. So yeah, some sections will be easier than others, but we're investigating what that looks like at the moment.
Okay. And my follow-up questions, thank you, Sarah, to that, is so there is currently a scope of work that has been given to Tonkin and Taylor to detail what is required to get the OTRB into the Ahuriri Regional Park treatment system.
Correct. That is part of the work that we have asked them to do.
When is the delivery date for that?
So they've put some options to us, and their final report will be with us later this week for that. And then once we've confirmed an option, they'll be progressing that to concept design, which will be sort of in the first quarter of next year.
Sorry, clarify that, if they're going to concept design on
the option that we select for the treatment wetland design.
Which will include getting in the OTRB?
Well, the wetland design will, I guess, assume that we can take all that water in there. There will be some further, more detailed pieces of work that will need to be done around how we get that water across there.
Okay. So just so I can summarise that, the wetlands are at their full capacity on site in terms of spatial area and all of the concepts we're going to work through in design workshops.
Yeah.
We're allowing enough space to get both catchments into the park. There is a detailed piece of work going on now around the more complicated OTRB, how to get that into the park, and I assume some funding conversations that happen with that as well. But the concept design that we'll later make a decision to sort of move forward with will allow for that to go into the park.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. I'll just open that up for questions. Councillor Price,
So just going back one of them.
with your microphone, thank you.
Just got me. Just going back to something you mentioned earlier. So with the extra stormwater going into the treatment plant, does that shorten the period to treat the water?
It can do, yes. Yeah.
Can do.
Yeah. So the modelling based on just putting the pitamu in had a sort of a really high percentage of it that could be treated and treated to a particularly high level, and those will decrease the more water we end up putting in through there.
So when you've got all your sums and figures, you'll be able to tell us that there's a 50% chance that
Correct.
you'll clean it right out, and
Yeah, we'll take X percentage of rainfall or X number of events under 30 mils. Yeah. So the crucial part is that first flush of stormwater off the city, and making sure we take as much of that as we can. That's where the biggest value is in the treatment.
Okay, thank you.
And Sarah, just while we're talking about contaminant loading in specific waterways, it's correct that the OTRB has the highest contaminant load. Is that correct out of the two catchments?
I don't know off the top of my head, but the OTRB does have the county feeding into it, which runs through the Onekawa industrial area. So
Yeah. Is there anyone able to confirm that the OTRB has the highest contaminant load between the two catchments we're talking about, Piramu and...
The team will have that information
we can get that to you
in their database, yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. Thank you. Member Eden.
Just had a question in regards to that contaminants, and so that it'll flush out in the new stormwater. Just the contaminants that sort of sit inside the soil and within the mud and that's currently there. So does that just remain untreated, or does that flush out?
Are you referring to sort of contaminated soil or
Mud and all that up there, because all that contamination's gone into the estuary that's sitting in there now around that area. And I'm just, planning wise, when you look at, new contaminants coming in, but the current ones that are there that have been there mostly for 30 years, and then what treatment, to try and mitigate that contamination that's already sitting in there.
It's a tricky one. We've looked at this a little bit in other areas, not so much in the Piramu and the OTRB, and some of the heavier contamination in our sediments and our soils is lower down, and so sometimes it's actually better to leave it rather than risk disturbing it and remobilising it into the network and into our waterways. So it's not. This is focused on the stormwater, the overlying water, rather than the sediment. But it is, it's something we're sort of aware of in the background, I guess.
Yeah, just aware that it's a problem that's not being resolved, and if it just sits there, it's someone else's problem, mostly in 20 years' time to fix potentially.
Yeah.
Thank you, Member Eden. I think that's a really good point around in-stream sort of treatment as well. And I just wonder, Cam, are you able to give us a bit of an oversight? I know in terms of the whole concept of stormwater treatment, we are looking at end of line with the park. It's our bottom end before we discharge. But there is some recommendations, I think, in our resource consent, the joint one between Napier and Hastings, around how we manage stormwater in upstream as well.
Yeah, I can give an overview, but I think Sarah and Phil and Russell have probably been dealing with that consent with proper work streams a bit more frequent. But when we prepared that consent application and when it was issued, probably going back 5 years now, maybe. The approach there was to firstly focus on high-risk industrial sites, which the Napier City Council bylaw was the vehicle for. So that essentially presents a framework whereby Napier City Council can undertake a risk assessment of industrial sites and work with those owners to develop on-site management procedures. So essentially trying to achieve stormwater quality outcomes on site. Conditions then sort of set down a bit of a monitoring phase to I guess chase down some contaminant sources and understand a little bit more what the contaminants of concern within the actual water bodies were. It then provided a framework for looking at in-stream treatment, and that was a matter of looking at preparing issues and options type paper and developing solutions. And then ultimately it was undertaking the same sort of issues and options approach, having understood what's going on in the catchment and having already made gains on site and stream to then focus on end of line, which is essentially what this project is all about. So yeah, that's kind of the high level. If there's any sort of further detail that anyone else can kind of provide, then that will be helpful.
Well, what I know it is outside, I guess, of the scope of the delivery of the park itself. So just to keep us sort of on track, can I ask, is there sort of a succinct program of upstream treatment, work programs, mitigation work, etc., that has been developed, or is that still in development?
We're still in the monitoring phase of that. So we've submitted as part of the consent, a stormwater monitoring strategy, and we've been gathering some really good data on that waterway network for, going on probably 4 years now, and that will help us to inform that and piece together those in catchment treatment options.
There's been a number of projects already. Sarah alluded to our soil profiling, or sedimentation profiling, which we found in the Thames Time catchment, that layering, and also looking at how we might include in-stream treatment between floating wetlands to also planted out areas, to also looking at reviewing, changing the profile of some of our urban waterways, to how do we plant those areas, how do we create those treatment quality zones, increase biodiversity, but also maintain that hydraulic need for during flood events. So there's been quite a lot of work and work program. We've been working on a joint committee. There's regional council staff and ourselves have been working together, because given that we're joint owners of the consent on those projects and trying to get those joint outcomes. A lot of the program was to understand a lot of the work. What were we dealing with? What water quality issues did we have? And I believe we found quite a lot. We did a citywide one with elevated, was it phosphorus? Or
really high phosphorus throughout the city, correct?
Given that was, buried in the marine silts that then became elevated and became our topsoil. So that's created quite a unique sort of water quality issue, and that's where we get that algal blooming occasionally in some of our waterways. So it's just really high nutrient in that regard. So the team have learnt a lot about our waterways in the last few years with that investigation, and it's created some interesting scenarios to try and grapple with. So, yeah.
Great, thank you, Russell. I think just in the interest of moving us on to our design workshop, what I'm taking away from the conversation is that we're sort of flagging a bit of a strategic risk to our vision here. Our vision was to treat all of, so 100% of the stormwater that currently goes untreated into Te Whanga. We've had some advice back from Tonkin and Taylor in their detailed investigation that may be complicated with regard to the OTRB. They have been provided a scope to give options on that, which the team is receiving later this week. So if that can be an integral part of our February committee meeting, getting a report back on what those options are, which might put us hopefully in a position to make some recommendations back to Sustainable Napier around funding, which I assume will be a large part of the decision making on those options. How does that sit with the committee.
I just said, one point, because obviously it's a better environment, and then obviously I just look at it from mana whenua perspective, because we're telling our whānau not to get mussels and that, not to, we've got to get out there and cook them. So when you look at a KPI on that, obviously that's a measure on the environment for our whānau that use that moana to gather kai, and so we want the water to be in a better state than what it is. So we're looking at treatment, but then I suppose long term we want better quality in that environment, and we want to sustain our communities in regards to. And I use the mussel or kutai as an example because that's what they gather to eat for sustenance, and because we're telling them no, it creates a whole lot of issues. And for the whole community, because the whole community goes out there and kutai mussels are affected, so is everything out. But so yes, we're talking about stormwater, but we're also talking about the long-term effects within the biodiversity of that catchment area. So I don't know if it's slightly outside the scope, but obviously it's an important part of what we're trying to achieve. I think long-term for everybody in a swimmable environment that can swim in that pond and not be the kids are not told top out.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think that swimmability is definitely a big one in terms of water quality, but in terms of sediment and the capturing and the sedimentation of the contaminants as well, and that's where that upstream work I think is quite important. So let me turn my mind to what recommendations we might be able to make in that space in our committee meeting later this afternoon. Are there any further questions on water quality? I think the team's got a good steer from us. Sorry, Rookie, we'll have to take it offline. Questions from the floor. Everyone's comfortable. We might move on to design workshop. Connie?
Yep, cool. Is mine? Oh, yes, it is. Maybe just precursor to design workshop, the core part that we'd really hope this joint committee takes away today is that the regional park spatial picture of it, we are going with the maximum treatment, the maximum space that the Tonkin and Taylor piece of work is recommending through Lagoon Farm project. So I know that there's a lot of conversation today that will influence Lagoon Farm project, but at this site, we're very confident that we've been working close enough that we've got that maximum footprint available. The other part that will be a bit of an update from our last iterations that have come to the committee is the location of those wetlands. So when we set out to do this project, we set out in 4 distinct phases. Each phase is at a different level of information gathering. So that first phase that we had, stormwater in the northeastern part of the site, and that was more just a schematic, hey, this is the area that we might be needing, but not necessarily the location we needed. And then once we interrogated that further, again, this was part of the Lagoon Farm project, site constraints came out like high groundwater, just suitable soils for wetlands as well. And that's come out that the best location to maximise the footprint is in the eastern part of the site. So the location of the wetlands have changed, and you'll see that in the design today. So hopefully those messages are clear, and I'll hand over to Gabe for the design workshop element. I might just swap things.
Kia ora koutou. I'm joined by my colleagues Will and Rebecca online on Zoom, hopefully, so we'll be doing a bit of a tag team session as we go through. And again, as we work through this, we do welcome questions and discussion. So we'll talk through a lot of the materials that have been pre-circulated. There's a few additional pieces of information on here we'll share, but really we're looking forward to having a good sort of iterative discussion as we work through. Right, just bear with me, I'm on a different machine here, so make sure I can steer us properly. Okay, so I guess out of this discussion, the key ask, the key goal of this is we're ideally getting to a stage where we can get clear direction from yourselves about which of the options we're going to review you think we should be pursuing into the detailed master plan exercise. We're still at a relatively high level at this stage, just looking at schematic areas and arrangements. But it'd be really good if at the end of the day, we've got to a point where there's a degree of comfort. You can say, yes, we like this option, or potentially a combination of elements from different options. And then our next stage is when we can move into the more detailed master planning process, which should be what are we looking to heading towards in the new year. if we get to a point today where we think there's still some more work, or maybe we need to wait for Tonkin Taylor to come back with a bit more information, that could potentially be a bit of a delay issue for us, but we'll work through whichever way it goes. So the structure today, you can see on screen, we've got a brief review of the design goals objectives. We'll show you some updated constraints analysis, which picks up on some of this new information about the wetland location, and also some more information which has come out from Lizzie in terms of avifauna risk and how we manage to build big wetlands on the site without attracting problem birds that could affect the airport. We'll take you through the 3 options that we've got tabled, along with a couple of slight revisions which have come out of some of the recent discussion around overall wetland sizes. We'll talk you through the MCA summary, and then we'll delve a little bit further into what we think should be the preferred option and our reasons for that, and a brief summary of TAG and key stakeholder feedback we've had to date on that. And then we'll close with opportunity for discussion or questions, and we can do markups or notes on the potential plans to sort of identify which elements should be carried into the final option. So I will see if Will can tag team in for now. He'll just give you a brief overview of some of the values and objectives that have come out of the earlier stakeholder and mana ahuriri engagement process. Will, are you online?
Morena tātou. Hopefully you can hear me all right.
Thanks, Will.
So yes, as Gabe has mentioned, and Cam, we had our second stakeholder hui on the 20th of November, but we also had earlier on in the year in July, we had our first workshops with stakeholders and also mana ahuriri, and the intent of those was to really understand and capture those values, aspirations. So what you see on screen is from the workshops with mana ahuriri. Certainly the priority was around why, te manotia why, understanding water quality and the treatment from the source to the outlet. Certainly the focus on te tai ao, these priorities te tai ao, so having green and blue infrastructure aligned within the urban area, and thinking about the wider intrinsic whakapapa and connections to the landscape. How we enhance the identity of mana ahuriri within this space, what some of those recreational opportunities might be and how they align to te whare tapawhā, and then looking at that opportunity for the commercial activities and productive. So in terms of those values, from that they stem these aspirations under these 4 pillars, if we want to call them that. So in terms of environmental well-being, really understanding te tai ao, how we restore the whenua, how we restore natural systems in place that were once there, and how we can enhance the environment. Looking at te whangaahu whenua, so activation and cultivation. Prior to these works, some of the initial kōrero that was happening was looking at what are the opportunities around restoring some of those cultural practices in terms of harvest, mahinga kai, pātaka, these taonga species, maturanga. So how will this space be able to capture that? Also looking at the economic opportunities, te whangaohanga. So looking at what types of economy could there be? So if we look at the harvesting, cultivation, are there opportunities there? Or are they more aligned to green-focused commercial activities? And then, of course, te whangatangata, so it's restoring the whenua for people, but also, for the wider environment itself. So looking at what are the opportunities to support community, what might that be, and how we might create these sequences of spaces within that. In a similar stream, a lot of the stakeholder engagement that we had with the wider group, a lot of that alignment was there. So everyone was in support of restoring the whenua, restoring the water, how we enhance water quality, identity, looking at those opportunities of recreation and commercial. So there was a lot of synergy between stakeholder, mana ahuriri, and community aspirations. If there's anything else, Gabe, or
I think that's great, Will. So unless anyone's got questions, we'll just soldier on. So the constraints analysis, we just wanted to quickly throw this on screen to illustrate the shift. So this was the previous scheme, which, as Connie said, was very schematic, just looking at potential areas and where the attenuation may sit. So that has transitioned to the TNT analysis, which has highlighted the area in yellow as being where you've got the sufficient topography, you're high enough above groundwater, where you can establish these constructed wetlands while minimising the earthworks you need to do to achieve them. From those, their initial concepts that came out were a couple of different layouts, which you can see represented here. One is a slightly larger area with 4 streams of treatment, and the other one was a more consolidated one, which reflects a slightly smaller area. So you'll see in the options, we actually picked both of those up to sort of see how they would sit in the site and how the master plan could respond to them. But following recent discussions around, okay, we really need to bank as much land as we can to achieve the larger potential treatment, we'll be looking to massage the master plan to make sure we can still fit in a maximal area. I'll just note that there is a certain ratio that they need to achieve to allow for the efficient stormwater treatment, which is generally a 1:5 or 1:4. So you've got a narrow width compared to length, and that's just related to giving enough time for the water to move through the plants to achieve the contamination removal.
Gabe, can I just pause you just in case anyone's
Sure.
got any questions? So this is essentially the 2 concepts or sort of designs for how the wetlands could look, which I think is quite important, and how the treatment could flow through them.
Yeah, just noting that these are very conceptual and they're more based around sizing only. They're very open to working with us to manipulate the shape and form, so it won't be quite as engineered on the ground, and looking to integrate pathways and connections and things like that as well.
Perfect. My first question is, could you just talk me through why we look like we've got a gap between the wetlands and one of the concepts? And
so this one, I'm not sure if you guys want to talk to it in more detail.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that one with the 2 streams, water would flow evenly across both of them. That just allows us to, so they need I believe it's a 5:1 ratio, length to width, for that treatment for the wetland sizing. That just allows a longer time.
Prevents short circuiting
Yeah.
and not getting the full treatment capacity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why they design it, that ratio.
Yeah, and the gaps are needed for maintenance and access as well.
yeah, thank you. I wondered if it had an operational advantage in terms of if you needed to have maintenance on one wetland and say lower flow times, you could close it off and work on it and still be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll need to do all replanting at some time, and or just where we have some losses and stuff like that.
Thank you, Chair Ormsby.
Thanks, Chair. So if I read the depths, right, and it's really quite hard to see, so people joining the gallery won't be able to see that either. Basically, from left to right as water flows, it's from a higher point down to a lower point heading towards the estuary channel. Correct? What is the difference from high point to end point in terms of depth?
So, jump in if I'm misspeaking, but my understanding is they are generally aiming for about a half-metre depth throughout the wetland system.
Yeah.
These lines you see crossing are spreader bars, so you'll have a gradual fall on the land, and when it gets to a point where you've got a natural change in topography, the water will spill over into the next cell, and then they're trying to achieve generally about a half-metre depth.
Right.
So you'll have the water will be pumped from the pirimu, lifted into some distribution channels.
Yeah.
It flows into the wetland, and then as it gets to the end of the wetland, it'll basically flow over into the existing sort of water channel system we've got in the wider lagoon farm or Ahuriri Regional Park. So for us, we're most interested in what happens with the water at the downstream end of this. This will be where it is cleanest, and is where an opportunity for us to really start to work with that water to help support more diverse wetland planting, potentially some wet forest planting. Within the wetlands themselves, they need to be very fully vegetated, and it will be a limited number of species which can fulfill the functions of that treatment. So the wetlands themselves will read as a reasonably consistent planting palette with, you might only get maybe 5 different species throughout those. But once you get out of that treatment requirement, then we can introduce a whole lot more biodiversity. So it'll be a bit of a contrast in how they appear and how they function.
And the depth is based on the need for flow, but also trying to balance that with where the water table's met underneath. Right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And the location also driven by, shifted it too far in any other direction, you're triggering a whole lot more earthworks, and that gets really expensive really quickly. So they've tried to find the sweet spot.
Yeah. And the planning of treatment through each of the phases, so I guess they're in 3 sections, there is no mechanical treatment, it's all natural treatment throughout the system.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, that's the plan.
That should come out with the work the concept work that the team will be coming with next year. Yep.
Okay, thanks. And then just to try and reconcile it with our lovely concept plans, I'm guessing that relates to this here.
Yes, we'll jump to that as we move through it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Brown.
Kia ora. Just noting the fall, is that about 3 metres? And if it is about that, will we be able to build that seamlessly into the space, or are we going to have it like awkwardly jutting up at the top?
Well, I hope we don't have too much awkwardness. I mean, there's still a lot of design time to go, I know, on the Tonkin Taylor work stream. So what they have told us is that this is their initial cut, and it's just based on area. They've done some initial calculations that highlighted about 40,000 cubic metres of material, which would be pulled out to achieve these basic treatment forms. So we'd be looking to work with that material to help try and blend that. We do have that sort of ratio 1:5 for the general shape of the channels that we do need to maintain, but there is some room to pull and push, and we can pull some areas out which might not perform much of a treatment function, but visually would help reduce the sort of hard engineering character of it. So we'd be looking to try and create that blend and integration as much as possible, but you will still have a certain geometry to these limited palettes of plants. So I think we can use that as a feature as well. It's going to be quite an interesting contrast, particularly if you think about people flying in, you're going to see this very strong geometry on the ground. So we're quite looking forward to being able to work with Tonkin Taylor to help manipulate that and fit that into the landscape well.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Thank you, Gabe. And just sort of as we move forward, I am really conscious that it is very easy to think of these as design options, what we're looking at today. And I think in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're more looking at preferred concepts. So all of the detail that are on this concept may very well look different by the time we get to design. There are some stuff that is more set in stone than others, for instance, the topography of what you're looking at now. But when we get into, it's not a design option, I guess, is just the reiteration I'd like to make to everyone who may be looking at these. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, yeah. I think the final design of the wetlands will definitely shift and change. We're looking at how they key into the wider site, and there'll be a few decision points that we'll be asking you guys to give direction on of what happens around these.
Thank you, and I think that keyword of direction is what we should focus on today. So which one best meets the direction we would like to give? Thank you, team.
Okay, so I'll just quickly move on. So this is representing the updated constraints mapping. So you can see we have the airport operational area that overlays pretty much smack in the middle of these new wetlands. So just so people are aware, that's going to have to be managed very carefully. So when they plant these out, for instance, they'll let those establish and get fully vegetated before you start introducing water, just to make sure we don't have large areas of open water attracting problem birds. The other part of that discussion in terms of avifauna values has influenced some of our broader discussions. You may recall we had some initial ideas about inviting the estuary in and manipulating the stop bank location. From further advice on that, to really avoid creating more challenges and risk for the airport, we need to make sure we don't encourage wading birds, we don't encourage waterfowl onto the site. So the strategy that we've talked about doing is, okay, the South Marsh stays intact as a very important habitat element, but we don't want to create others within the site that's going to encourage birds to fly between those right through that flight path. The other component is we'll have to think carefully about the vegetation that we introduce onto site. So it's in a similar scenario. We don't want to introduce an island of, say, more forested cover on the west side and then another area on the east side, which will encourage birds to fly between those. So we've discussed having a more graduated approach where we have taller vegetation to the west, and that falls in height as you go across the site, just to avoid creating that attraction for birds to move back and forth in a way which might conflict.
Thank you, Gabe. And just to close the loop on that comment around softening the edge or allowing the estuary into the park. So just to confirm, none of our design concepts involve touching the stop bank in any way. That was something we excluded relatively early in the project. There would be a range of complications with doing that, including its effect on upstream habitat, and that was not something we wanted to investigate. So.
Yeah. So, and in addition to that, further investigations about the stop bank lifespan, if there's any future work, and how suitable it is for future scenarios. It's basically got an indefinite life at this stage. It's in good condition, very, very expensive to move. So the decision point was, well, we'd rather invest that money within the site rather than trying to move what is functioning very well at the moment, and changing that would potentially create more habitat for wading birds, which then triggers more concern for the airport.
Great, thank you. Chair Ormsby.
Thank you. I don't know if you're able to help answer this or someone from the team. We did consider, and we need to consider, disturbance of other species, and because you've already spoken briefly about it, is there someone in the team that can tell us where those spots where we shouldn't be disturbing already habitat and species that have established themselves there?
So I don't have a figure on this presentation, but maybe Cam, you might be able to recall. I think there was an area of wetland down in here and another area down in here which were identified as having higher value.
Yes.
We do, because we are ultimately undertaking a restoration project, we'll be enhancing those. So there is a consenting pathway to allow us to do that. And we'll certainly be aware of that as we move through the master planning process. We're not going to, for instance, put a big mound of fill on those zones. So we'll be looking to try to work with those and amplify the value of those.
There's two more little pockets further towards the southwest, I suppose. But the advice from those experts was that the areas identified were quite low value within the bounds of the site itself. So they raised no concerns with those areas being modified on the basis of the net outcomes to be achieved.
Okay, so unless there's any more questions, we'll delve into the three sort of revised, concept directions we've circulated.
I just had a question just following on from Councillor Ormsley's, and it's just about I suppose when we talk about the biodiversity and then we talk about particularly the flounder, and then I'm just following up because will we see a return to that environment? It makes it really good to just go there, catch flounder. You go there now, you're likely to catch anything. So I'm just saying with that storm, with that release and that, I don't know if that was put into the modelling just with the biodiversity and the flounder, particularly in that area. Because it's, to enhance the area, you need to rebuild the stock, and to rebuild the stock, you need,
so
to live there.
I guess with the inability or impracticality of opening up more tidal zones within the site, there's probably limited things we can do to help, for instance, Patiki, aside from the improving of water quality moving through the system. So I think what we'll be looking to doing is identifying, okay, what is the more freshwater base or inland systems that we could potentially try to create more of that mahinga kai value and create opportunities in the future for whether it's food or fibre or timber or other materials to be able to be used from this site. So it's a little bit of shift. The flounder and the shellfish and things like that, we won't be able to directly influence as part of the master plan project to the degree we talked about initially. But I think there is still definitely opportunities for other species and other mahinga kai values.
Yes. And I just base that on our kaumata and clear, some of the stories say when they were going and gathering kind of water, and they say it was good to be able to return that biodiversity to a similar state when they were growing up. So yeah, just sort of picking up on Councillor Ormsey's point in that, and we get some of that returning. Well, it's always great.
Yeah, absolutely. So the three options you can see here, they essentially reflect a gradient. So from on the left-hand side, we have got an option which includes larger areas of sort of more active recreation and programs, with opportunity for some complementary commercial, we've called it, such as a native plant nursery, as well as potentially some other enterprises, which maybe there's ringoa medicinal extraction from plant materials, cultural tourism, ecotourism. As you move to the right, we are dialing down the amount of, I guess, human activity on the site and more in favour of more an ecological focus. We are moving from this more southern side of the site being more heavily programmed and used to a more dispersed model where you've got some activity nodes through the site, but the overall character is much more passive and ecology focused. So I'll just delve quickly into each one and talk about some of the key features. So this one, as was discussed earlier, reflects the treatment concept that Tonkin Taylor showed us. You can see we've started to soften it and play with some of the geometries and showing potential pathway connections through. As noted, they'll have to have a maintenance access pathway or track around the entire wetland area, so that provides an opportunity for double duty as cycle and pedestrian routes.
Sorry, Gabe, do you have a name for this direction?
We have called this option 1, recreational focus.
Recreation focus.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Direction 1, recreation focus.
So we have got all of the options share the common access of the existing roundabout on Pre-Benson Drive, and that's been selected because we have got a existing, obviously, roundabout to work with. We're sufficiently distanced from the main highway intersection and the curve on Pre-Benson Drive for good visibility, and it does get you into the centre of the site quite nicely. So that would include having to bridge across the existing channel, be it culvert or bridge structure, and that would bring you into essentially the heart of the site. So on this one, we've shown some complementary commercial area to the right. This, as I said, could include a raft of different programs. To the left, we've identified this as a nursery community garden zone. So that could be a combination of both production to support the planting of the site, potentially some retail open to the public, but also education as well. Both of those are around 8 hectares, so fairly generous size, and we've got a scale comparison further on which will help illustrate just how big that is. As you pass into the site towards the west, we've identified an entrance hub. So that would be the idea of an information centre or an entry area where people come into the site, they can park and then start to circulate and explore the wider area. Anchored off that is a recreational open space zone. Now, this has been included in this option to give the flexibility of there might be a whole raft of different programs that could be included in that, be it there might be some things like some sports fields in the future if that was a need, but also things like, say, BMX or mountain bike trails. Frisbee golf is becoming very popular, so we're just identifying there's potential for some programmable space in there. But cradling around that is area tagged as a cultural hub. And the idea is that we might have some facilities to support teaching and tourism around weaving and flax. You may be able to accommodate some temporary accommodation for school groups and things like that coming onto the site. And that ties into a potential waka landing or a zone which sort of has that connection to the Taipo stream. So at high tide, you've got potential to be able to launch some waka or canoes and explore down the Taipo and into the main channel. In terms of broader connections, again, we'll have some diagrams further on, but we've identified keeping the existing one under the underpass beside the estuary, under the expressway. We've tagged a potential one for the future across from the existing pump station, which could be connected up through to the airport. And then you'll see on some of the other ones, we also have tagged a potential one across the hills to the west. So option 2 starts to look at more of an interwoven landscape, we've called it. And that's reducing the scale of some of these programs and then starting to pull them further around the site. So you've got a bit more of a journey between those. The education hub we've notated here sits on the edge of a larger wetland rushland area, and that is building on the existing channel, which would take the overflow from the pre-Benson channel and then through the site, and that would be supplemented by all the flow through the treatment wetlands. So as it passes from the treatment, we'll be pushing it into an area where we could put Kaikatea forest, more wetland shrub associations. Again, on all of these options, we'd have to be very careful not to create large areas of open water, and certainly no open water bordering on sort of mown or short grass, which is a key attractant for the problem birds that we're trying to not encourage into the site. This option has the Eco Camp Cultural Hub, still located to the western side, but at a smaller scale. And then we have also identified a potential for a small estuary walker landing up near the existing pump station. So that being a place where you could have connections and tours down to the lower estuary, but also it might be containing some equipment facilities that the people who are staying within the Eco Cultural Hub could come and use. You can see the dashed lines around the site, so maintaining the existing cycleway around the periphery of the site, but also weaving other pathway opportunities through the site as well. These sort of organic forms you see through here are representative of where we could use some of that excess fill to create some higher points in the topography. And the intent is you've both got the opportunity for people to have that high vantage point you can see over the site, but also referencing some of the island forms which were present in the former estuary pre-earthquake days. And then option 3, which we've called Nature First, dials back the amount of human programming further again, and it does consolidate the I guess the potential for commercial or nursery operation and the entrance hub right in the centre of the site. The Eco Camp we've still kept within the western portion of the site, and on this one we have illustrated a potential alignment for a predator-proof fence which can surround the site. That, I guess for context, is approximately 8 kilometre length, encloses about 255 hectares of area, which is very similar to Zealandia and Wellington. So it gives you a bit of a sense of the scale of the site you've got to work with here. This is included as a potential idea. Obviously, there would have to be business plans and all sorts of things that go with it. And you may find you could achieve that through just a really intensive, well-managed trapping program as well. So it's not saying it's something we have to do. It's we've got room to do this if that's a direction that people want to support. And I guess across all of these, there's such a huge area. It's going to be a very long-term legacy project. So you'd be looking at phasing. So you may very well look to establish the treatment wetlands as a first step, and then potentially start to pick off some of these other pieces in time, and would be wanting to build on flexibility. So if the context changes, or maybe there's additional money that comes up, then you can move things forward or shift things around. So if there's no specific questions on these, we'll just quickly run you through the MCA process we use to start to assess the pros and cons of each.
Thank you, Gabe. I suggest there are probably lots of questions about those, but let's do the MCA and then we'll come back to those kind of overarching questions around how the direction's sitting with everyone, what components we have questions on, and we'll...
Maybe I should quickly go to the third option, the preferred option, because that sort of synthesises a lot of these. And there's a couple of things I just want to point out that we would have to shift around to accommodate the maximal size of wetland zones.
Okay.
So if I jump down to here, we took, based on some stakeholder feedback, and the MCA review, the option 2, I guess the interwoven landscape came out as likely a preferred direction. So we've got a series of analysis here that we can talk to once we've talked about the previous concept options. But I just wanted to show you quickly this one. So that shows you the scale. So we've got Onikawa Park overlaid in here. We've got a rugby field. We've got the Midland Horticultural Nursery in there. So it gives you a picture of the scale of the site we're dealing with. We've got a lot of room to work with. So don't hesitate to recommend additional programs or shifting things around or shrinking and moving stuff. The other one I just quickly want to show you is a quick re-sketch showing what we would have to do if we heard back from Tonga and Taylor that actually we need to maximise the wetlands as much as possible. So this is just showing, okay, if we had to shoehorn that into the site, what would that do to some of these other programs? So in this case, it was probably moving the complementary commercial to the south, moving the nursery to the west, and maybe tying it to the eco hub. So we can still keep the same sort of programs and some of the relationships in the site, but we're just having to consolidate things further.
Sorry, Gabe, can you just clarify what that is? Sorry, because earlier we heard that it was the biggest wetland possible in that first stage, and this seems different.
So this, if you look back at, oh, I'm moving stuff around where I shouldn't. So if you jump all the way back to these options, so these were the initial concepts that Tonkin Taylor gave us to work with. And then some of the subsequent discussions when they're looking in to try to bring in the other flows from the OTBRG, there is a potential for needing additional area. So there was a late test to see, okay, if they come back and say we actually need to use this entire yellow area, what would that do to the master plan layout? So while we have shown these early concepts on these three options, we just wanted to demonstrate that once they work through their concept in more detail and come back with a more resolved option for how those actual wetlands configurations will work, this is how we'd accommodate it within the context of the overall master plan.
Do you mind if I jump in here as well?
With a mic. So the direction that we're asking from the Joint Committee today is those three. So we've got recreation first, interwoven land use, and then nature first. And so depending on what one you select today, we're very confident that we can manipulate all three of those directions to respond to the wetland need. So if you do want that recreation first, great. Probably the western part of the park will be pretty saturated with activity. But if you want nature first, then all good again. It will just be a less dense environment of human activity. So everything's workable, everything's on the table, is what we're hoping to communicate. Thank you.
So I guess if people want questions or to discuss some of the ideas in those three options we've tabled.
So Gabe, you mentioned you have a recommended option that you were going to run us through. Can you do that in enough detail that we can see it?
So this is out of the MCA analysis and the feedback from the initial stakeholder or the most recent stakeholder meeting we've had and some feedback from TAG. We have jumped to the middle option, the interwoven landscape, as one that seemed to be the best match to some of those key design goals and aspirations that we'll talk to at the start. So it does provide opportunity for obviously nature first. It does provide some opportunity for some commercial opportunity, economic activity. It does provide for some activity and cultural activities within the site. So this was a more resolved one. It reflects a few tweaks from the previous three. We have got a highway designation on the eastern side of the site, sorry, which we've had advice we're best to try to keep critical infrastructure out. The happy benefit of that is it means if we're not putting wetland construction within that zone, then the existing blow cart course, for instance, could stay where it is for the time being. We have shown a revised option of, okay, the western end of this, you've got potential to incorporate that sanctuary or predator-proof area if that was desired. We have just altered some of the graphics here to reduce the amount of blue because some of the feedback we had was we're not wanting to create large areas of open water, so let's not illustrate it on the plan. You can see we've got a network of pathways through the site, so the main entry road to a central distribution point that pushes people either out to the blow-cart course or the commercial area, a linkage through to the entrance hub, which is located on this almost peninsula, which is formed between the existing drainage channel and these wetland treatment zones. And then bridging across that channel, we've got linkages to an education hub and an eco camp cultural hub. And that's sitting within a large expanse of coastal forest, so it's about 61 hectares winding through the western side. You've got about 42 hectares of wetland rush zone through. And again, that would be supported by both the current flows that are coming off the development to the south, the pre-Benson Drive channel, but then also the regular flows coming through the treatment wetlands would all be feeding into the zone. So we see that as being pretty exciting opportunity, and it does lend itself to this being a core part of, I guess, the ecological focus for the site. The opportunity to create a lot of different areas and zones. If we're looking at the division of activity across the site, you can see the green and olive tones through here represent the ecology focused work, including the treatment wetlands, whereas we've got the native wetland through here, 3 in blue, and then this represents the amount of, programmed or human activity on the site. So proportionally, we're definitely achieving that, nature first goal, with a vast majority of the site devoted to more of that sort of natural ecological regeneration. In terms of trail access through the site, so we've had some initial studies looking at, on a site-specific basis and then also a regional basis, how does this fit into the existing cycle network and pedestrian networks and how those key connections should work. So you can see here we have had a stab at initial hierarchy of where the cycle walk routes would go, where you might have pedestrian only, being these orange routes through here, how the road circulation might work in terms of getting access into and through the site. And you can see these light dashed lines represent the vehicle maintenance access around the wetland structures. This just illustrates how it fits into the broader network, so still maintaining the cycleway that runs around the periphery of the site with some additional connections through the site to try and improve that connectivity. We have tagged that a future connection to the Porati Hills and then one north to the airport would be good to have as part of the master plan goals. Again, that could be a phased approach. It might take a long time. For instance, the airport one would rely on negotiation with PAMU for access through to connect to the existing circulation around the airport wetlands, but we think it's an important opportunity to flag. As briefly mentioned before, we've got the size comparison, just showing how some other existing parks and facilities fit onto the site to reinforce it as a very large area. This is just a quick snippet showing, if we've got all these programs and pathways through there, how does it affect undisturbed habitat? We do want to encourage things like bittern and some of the more reclusive birds to be able to use the area. And advice we've had is if you allow for a 50-metre buffer zone around any human activity zones, then that's the areas they'll use. So that just gives you an indication of the extent of habitat opportunity that will be allowed for in the scheme. And I think maybe I'll just finish with this one. So as I mentioned, this will be a long-term project, so we need to start thinking about how we would phase this. And I think this would be an adaptive response, but our first thought was, we're building the treatment wetlands, that's a priority. So as part of that, we'd be able to do some initial landform development, but the residual part of the site would likely still be grazed in the interim. There may be opportunity to establish the nursery if that's a direction we want to go, because that could be used to help support the development of the wetlands and some initial planting throughout the site. Stage 2, you may look at, if this commercial area is an opportunity to create funds to help fund the rest of the park development, that might follow on as the next stage. And then that might support some initial restoration planting on the north side of the wetlands. Stage 3, be looking at the enhancement of the existing channels through the park and starting to create this broader concept of these wetland zones. That could still be done retaining some of the grazing within the site. And then stage 4 might be, decision point, we're going to retire grazing altogether and then start to indicate the broader restoration of the western end. So that's just a bit of an indication of some of the direction and options we could go to. Perhaps we can get to this later. This is just starting to look at some of the program options that we see as potentials attached to some of those zones. So we can welcome to have a look at that now, but it might be better to go back to those options for discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Serge. Thank you, Gabe. I think getting into staging might be jumping a little ahead. So what I'll do is just sort of reconfirm, I guess, the question that you're asking of us while we're looking at this is that what direction of the three and the hybrid preferred option with some of that community feedback that's already gone to it, what do we like, what best fits our vision, our objectives for this space. Are there parts of the directions that we don't particularly resonate with that we'd like to see incorporated into the one that we do? So what do you like? What do you dislike? What direction best fits? So open the floor to the committee. Who would like to go first? Chair Ormsby.
Thank you, Chair. I guess from the stakeholder and community engagement, it's telling us that either nature first or the merged model are the two favoured options compared to the recreation, and I agree with that. I think the option to incorporate both plans is a sound one. I'm a bit, I guess, still confused around the predator-free fencing over part versus almost all of the park. And I guess that's my first question, is around how did you determine between the two predator-free fenced options why it's a good idea to have those areas singled out as being protected?
So I guess we wanted to illustrate between this option 3, nature first, and that revised preferred option, there's different configurations that could be approached.
Yeah.
This one shows it surrounding the vast majority of the site, and actually there's no reason why that couldn't actually encompass the southern marsh if that was desired as well. The separation was delineated based on, okay, this is the core area of human activity there, so we don't want to create barriers to access in and out and through those zones. So as you pass throughout past that zone, then you'd start having to go through gates and ways to secure that zone. So it's really just an illustration. I think this is a program which could be, it might be part of the initial vision that yes, we're seeking to go down this track in the future, or it might be as simply, okay, we recognise there's an opportunity. It may or may not happen, but we at least, when we lay out the master plan, we can include sufficient clearances to allow for it to be done in the future, and it would work in quite well with the need to keep the stop bank relatively clean of vegetation and clear of vegetation. So we see we've basically followed the periphery of the site because that's a fairly easy path. Where you start interacting with water is more challenging, so we've tried to minimise that by just having the one crossing point here and then wrapping it around the far side of the wetland treatment zone. The preferred option down here, we just wanted to explore, okay, how would that look if we wanted to go with a reduced scale? So again, that is following the edge, essentially the edge of the channel through here.
Yeah.
And we would have to look at how the water flow would be accommodated from the wetlands underneath or through that structure. But I don't think it's, I just want to, I guess, note that it's not a key focus for the master plan. It's not going to be a make or break. It's more just, here's an opportunity, and if you wanted to pursue it, we think you might be able to look at an alignment such as this. And obviously you'd have to go through a fairly detailed business case analysis of how that would work. How would you fund it? As a guide, I did some initial number crunching looking at this scheme here, and that would be around about a $4 million project to fence that. And then you've got ongoing maintenance as well. So it is a big ticket item.
Okay.
Thank you. While we're on the predator proof, because we are asking what do you like, what do you not like around the directions, is it fair to say, interested in the committee, that whatever master plan direction we come up with, it should be enabling of predator proof fencing, probably to the bigger extent rather than the smaller extent, so that option is there? How does that sit with the committee in terms of direction?
Yeah, I suppose we're supportive of predator-proof fencing, and we're doing one up in Toyota. We're looking at that as an option at the moment. And then, so if you look at different regions and then just the benefits it's going to bring in regards to the wildlife, it's most probably a good option. I just know some of the options when we looked at predator-proof fencing was the costing, very expensive and that to put up. So, yeah, I just know the budget there mostly, but I'm supportive long-term working towards predator-proof fence. And the introduction, obviously, to the wildlife, to the community, because it'll be in everyone's gardens. And it might be a launching pad. Good option.
Good option.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, kia ora. Yeah, I agree. I think It's important to include the provision in the master planning process. Whether it'll happen or not, I think will come down to the business case. I do understand they're really expensive and that trapping can achieve a large majority of the aim for a lot less, but it's good to include the provision.
Thank you. Right, so the floor is open for any components of any of the direction that we like. Councillor Price.
Just a question, earlier on you had a bigger wetland area? You questioned it in that, and I was, did I get that wrong, or is there a possibility of a bigger area?
So we had based on the late advice from, the most recent advice, that we may potentially need larger areas of wetland from what was illustrated in those first concepts from Tonkin Taylor. These are the concept areas that we've based the concept development on so far. We just wanted to test, okay, if they said, for instance, I'll just draw a line on here so we've got something to look at. If rather than this zone, it's not showing up at all, sorry. Let's try this one. If, for instance, they needed that area actually became expanded and we needed to go all the way down around to here, what would that mean for the master plan? So as Connie mentioned, we wanted to see, okay, where could we pull and push some of these programs to accommodate that? So I think when we're getting to a decision point from you guys, if you say, yes, we like the interwoven and we want to have some commercial opportunity, some nursery opportunity, some eco cub, we just wanted to explore how would that be pushed around if the final wetland ended up being more close to this orange, this yellow line that we've got shown on the plan here.
So if you did extend it, it would make it more efficient for cleansing the water. Wouldn't that be right?
Well,
do more water?
Okay, go ahead.
No, that's okay. It will just depend on what comes out of their further work. So I know that, as I mentioned before, those ratios are quite important. And so that's why in those earlier designs, they've got either the two streams or the one. Sort of, I guess, the wider we get, the harder it is to achieve that ratio. So it will just depend on what comes out of these next phases and whether we can allow for that treatment on that site.
Because when I put my infrastructure hat on, obviously the more water we can treat, the better. So where's the answer?
Yeah. So maybe on this one, for instance, this width through here might be become more inefficient. So we may find that the final configuration might be more like that, in which case we've still got a fair bit of room to play with in here. So we just wanted to look at what the, I guess, worst case scenario in terms of space for us to work with, but maximum scenario for the wetland, what that would look like. So that's the reason for putting this image on the screen.
So just a question to the chair, I guess. So the door's still open to alter these things?
Absolutely. So we are just going to give some feedback on the direction and the placement and the detailed design of how that placement will sit spatial-wise and topography-wise on the site will happen. So just to remind the committee, we will, at our meeting this afternoon, give some direction to move forward into more detailed design. The step in that is that it goes to council and out for community consultation. So both of those steps may have changes as well.
Yeah.
And it will go to our board of mana Ahuriri, who may have some changes as well, and back to council because obviously funding decisions land there. So a range of steps where changes to the actual physical place marking of things will work. And that's why we're at the same time as doing this, we're also working on the detailed design through the Tonkin Taylor scope that Sarah and Phil spoke about earlier. So hoping that they come together at some point, and it sounds like they will.
So the result of Tonkin Taylor will tell us which is obviously the biggest and the longest and the
I suspect they will tell us how much it will cost us to achieve what we would like to achieve.
Thank you.
This might help clarify that the latest
use a microphone. Thanks, Cam.
the latest wider yellow area, the wider you get, the less effective treatment. So even though the area may be available, once they do the design, it might prove that it's actually not usable, and that's why you'll get that narrower, if that clarifies it. Yeah.
That's covered what I was looking at. Thank you.
Can I just give a little bit of feedback for discussion on looking at the three directions and our preferred? In direction 3, I really liked that you went straight into the entrance space rather than, I think the other ones had you sort of hitting, say, the commercial and the nursery and then maybe veering off to find the entrance. It felt cleaner to me to be able to sort of have a direct path into the entrance, and I know that could be managed through design, but that was just a piece of feedback from myself. I also, in direction 2, I quite liked the placement of the potential walker landing, not being down the typo. That I am no driver of walker, but that seemed difficult to get around the corner there. I thought the more simpler approach, if there was to be a landing site straight in high tide off the estuary, seemed more appropriate. And I quite like the amphitheatre space. So I'll throw all of those comments out for discussion. Chair Ormsby.
Just to follow on from you, Chair, just looking at the site area distribution, 39% of it is actually activity where people are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we could probably maybe condense some of those activity areas where human contact is going to be. Now I'm looking at the preferred option, and I guess does an education hub have to be separate from an eco camp and a cultural hub? But actually I want to pull that cultural hub, and it should be with the entrance hub by the entrance of where people are coming into. So just utilising those spaces, and actually instead of having 2, can you have 1, and it can be a bit bigger, and that restricts human activity, especially if you're going to allow driving, which I sort of start to think of traffic. You're going to need at least 2 lanes, one going each way, and what sort of influence that may have on the ecosystems around those areas. So I think there can be efficiencies with communal spaces, and definitely alongside Annette's comments, the entrance hub more central as you enter, with the cultural hub being there with it. So those are my pieces of feedback.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Yep, Member Eden, followed by Councillor Brown.
Yeah, and I'm the same on the entranceway in regards to the cultural component in a waharo. Obviously, when you go into our marae, and it'll be better, on a similar format in regards to recognising that partnership and that, and what we're trying to achieve. So the cultural hub would be good at that entrance. So just support Councillor Ormsby's kōrero in regards to that. That was my main point, was just around that cultural hub. And then I know why you've put it at the back in its trees, but potentially that could be part of the educational one as well. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, kia ora. I like where you've landed and the option that you've picked and the revised option. Similar to the conversation already taking place, just reflecting on some of the comments that were made at the engagement session that we had with the public. The eco camp sounded really cool, like the scouts were really excited about that. So that sounds really cool. One thing I'm concerned about is having a whole heap of mown spaces. So keen to reduce the amount of mowing and just have this as natural and as rehabilitated as possible. And I can't quite visualise the difference between what would happen in an education hub and an entrance hub. So I was wondering whether those two could be combined. So yeah, probably along the similar lines of reducing as much as the human footprint and allowing for as much regeneration of the site as possible. Having said that, I'm really struggling to get my head around the scope in the scale of this all. So one of the questions that was asked at that session was around, like, how long would it take someone to do that walking path? Just to kind of get some scale.
I don't have that off the top of my head. I did walk around the outside of the site yesterday just to have a good poke around, and it does take quite a long time on a hot, blustery day. So I think we do need to think about dispersing activity points through the site. So you can go to a destination, say the entrance hub, and then move to some other destination or nodes through the site where you've got a pause point, a rest point. Usually it's around a 15-minute walk radius is comfortable for most people, which is that would probably take you from the entrance here to the far side of the site.
Oh, so it's not that big in terms of
I think
people going on a nature walk, I suppose.
You could easily consume, several hours meandering through some of these more organic pathways.
Yeah. I think one of the things I'd be quite keen to see is if you can incorporate sort of access for walking in nature for all levels.
Yeah.
So kind of like White Pine Bush has that amazing track, and then it's got one for those who want a bit more of a workout. Yeah.
Good feedback. Thank you, Councillor Brown. Right, I'm conscious that we are getting to the end of our workshop time, close for a cup of tea, and we do get a bit of a second bite at this in our meeting to follow. So unless there's any other burning sort of comments to make around general direction, what I think we might do is just pass over the team if there's any wrap-up comments, and we will have a break for some kai and a restroom break, and come back at 11:30 for our committee meeting, where we can have another discussion around at what level of endorsement we're happy to move forward to the next stage. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll pass back over to you, Cam. Thank you, Gabe.
Okay, I think just to clarify, we had put a little bit of time aside to talk you through the MCA. I'm just wondering whether the discussion that we've had in terms of describing the three directions and then the more refined preferred one, are you happy that I guess the team has undertaken the NCA sufficiently to arrive upon that recommendation just from what you've picked up a bit organically through discussion, or do you want to run through that after the break?
I'll get a bit of a steer from the committee, that multi-criteria assessment. I think it's not in our attachment to our paper this afternoon, or it is? I don't think it is. No. Perhaps if we could just circulate that, and then I'll just invite committee members if they've got questions just to come back via email on that, and I'm quite happy to be CC'd in on that if there's any concerns.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just one question.
Councillor Price.
I may have missed one, but I would a site visit would be quite good now, just so we can go through what we're going through and picture it.
Yeah, would you be comfortable to do that when we're open for our community feedback and we plan a site visit
I just think it would be quite
community as well?
You can sort of relate to it a lot. I might have missed one visit, but I think you'd be able to relate to what we're talking about a little bit more.
Yep.
I'll support that too. I think always feet on the ground is always a good thing, and you can see what's there physically rather than, not that I have been there, but I'm just saying we could run together.
We had made that observation ourselves this morning, thinking now that we've got some directions, that might be good to do ahead of the next joint committee meeting, which I think we're scheduling for February. So whether that's done as a separate outing prior to that or as part of that session, that's something that we could have a think about.
Just
thank you, Councillor Brown. I think possibly ahead of our 17th of Feb meeting would be beneficial. And Russell has made the offer to go out and do some pegging. But perhaps if we could just get some colourful pegs in the ground, even just to show the extent of the wetlands, for instance, while we're on site, I think that would be helpful in conceptualising it. final comments, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, just a question for like the amount of space that we've dedicated to each of these. So the education hub, about 5 hectares. Isn't that like a small farm? Like a farmlet type recreation?
Yeah,
Lifestyle block. Sheep and cattle.
Yeah, lifestyle block. That's the word I'm looking for.
yeah. So the areas we've shown there are pretty large, pretty generous, and I guess the next step will be as we go through the master plan is actually going through and put scale appropriate references. So, for instance, here's an example from another project where at the I shall go to this side. At the larger scale, it's more of a zone plan, but then at the next stage, we actually go down and drill down what the actual program space and build, some indicative building platforms and things. So we've got a large area identified, but you might find your actual built zone within that might be comparatively small.
Yeah.
Because yes, it is a very large area, and when you get an opportunity to go on site, it'll I think that'll be really useful to just sort of appreciate the size of the areas we've got to work with.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, good observation that the components within those designated spaces are yet to be defined. Thank
Hopefully
you.
not just long.
All right, if you're comfortable with that direction, Cam?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. I might ask Joe if you're happy to do kai karakia for us, and then we'll be back at 11:30.